Hello friends of .NET, it's Tuesday, which means another set of API reviews, and I shouldn't jinx it, but if everything goes after plan, then we should be almost done with most of the stuff today and this Thursday, so we'll see how it goes. So then, all right, the first one, Lakshan, you are up.
Thanks. So this is a request from the AOT team, and Mikhail's time zone is such that it's like 2 o'clock in the morning there. So I'm going to speak on behalf of the AOT team. So the request is to have a new API for Enum to get the values as underlying type. And it helps in cases where reflection is not supported in the first case, and in the AOT case where the runtime code generation is not supported. And specifically for AOT, the Enum type is not necessarily available. So we generate a warning in the normal type.getEnum values. With this one, it kind of gets the underlying value types, the numerical types, and it works in reflection as well. So the request is, can we please have this API? This came across because we were annotating the runtime libraries for to be AOT safe, and specifically in the component model, like assembly, there is a call to enum.getValues, which is dangerous. But if we kind of have this API, then it will kind of work.
So I guess my first question is, what do you intend on doing with these values when they're returned? Like, do you intend on just printing them out? Do you intend on doing some type of comparison? Like, how do you plan on using these?
Yes, so both. We could kind of print it out, like the order. In generally, the pattern that we see is with getting the enum values and then enumerating through the values and kind of doing some action. We were exploring the existing API, and it kind of, Stephen looked at the patterns in the from a search, and it looks like, basically the kind of behavior that it has is to enumerate and print, do a string interpolation, or put it to a string and stuff like that. So, and that those scenarios break in a case where originally we just wanted to change the get enum values to do what this API is proposing. So this API allows reflection and AOT-like scenarios where runtime code generation is not allowed to be AOT safe. So developers can use this API and get an native AOT application, or use the reflection-only context scenarios.
Because my one immediate question that I have is why does this have to be an array typed as the underlying type? Why can't you just return, say, a U-long array from this and then use that to hold any possible enum type that might exist or enum value that might exist?
So the given that there are different underlying types, the array abstraction seems like a pattern where we don't force the actual the data type to be changed from in whatever it was, the underlying data type. So if it was byte or int or whatever the thing is, it would it would present that with the array. Whereas if we kind of widen it or give us very specific one, there might be a change.
Well, the reason I ask is because enum equality, for instance, is different than numeric equality. If an enum is backed by a floating point, for instance, float or double, float and double have equals methods which behave differently than enum.equals if it happens to be backed by a float or a double. And that's why I asked, if you're intending on doing things that the runtime itself would have done, such as, does this value equal some other value, or is it less than or greater than some other value? You would have to special case all of that logic based on what the backing type of the enum is. Whereas if we just exposed absolutely everything as a U-long to you, your code would literally just work with no changes whatsoever required by you. It would just work.
Well, U-long has potential issues in that mono supports float and double backed enums. You're returning long when it might be a U-long, and so you're losing signed information, even if it is ultimately the same bitwise pattern. There are definitely considerations and potential issues there.
Sure. But for the common case of equality comparison, bitwise equality is exactly what you do. And signedness be damned. Anyway, if your answer is, we really just want the raw underlying value as an array, that's fine. Just keep in mind that we would need to document the API as hey, if you're trying to mimic what the runtime would have done, there are other considerations you have to keep in mind, and this API is not going to help you with that. So now you have to have a switch statement inside of your own code. If this API was intending to help you avoid that switch statement, then this API hasn't fulfilled its job.
Maybe I missed this, but how is this different from enum.getValues that returns array?
The array that it returns is typed as the actual enum itself.
Oh, I see.
Right. So for attribute usage targets, for example, enum.getValues returns an array that is an attribute usage targets array, right. Whereas this API would return an int array because the backing type of that enum is an int.
Gotcha. So it's the same difference. I guess enum.getValues is logically the same as what is this on type? Type.getEnumValues, right? Sorry, not getEnumValues. Except that it returns it in a boxed way. Yeah. It makes sense. I mean, I'm not sure I would look on type. It's a bit weird that we have methods on enum and types or methods on type, but I guess either one would work.
Also, so for enum, we have it on both type and on enum itself, and we have it on both because it really depends on whether you're working with type of or a few other things. And so we really have two APIs that just do the same thing, with the enum one deferring to the type one. So maybe we should have this API on type, and then also on enum have a get values as underlying type. to
Yeah.
parity the exact, the surface area we already have between the two.
I think I would agree with that. That would make the most sense to me.
With the one on enum being generic?
No, the non-generic one. The one that takes type. So it would be an overload to get values that takes the type. Like, overload is a bad name, but like it would just be the same. So the signature would literally be public, public static array get value as underlying type, and that would take a type, and that would just call the other one.
And system array is the best return type we can give here?
Right.
Yes.
Yeah.
What else would you return? Because it can't be object array, because then you get them all as box values. You want the actual array, right? And if it's non-generic, then array is the best thing you can do. I mean, you could return object, but then that's even worse.
Well, I mean, I'm certainly never a fan of closed generics, where it looks like you can put in any T, but only if you work. But if we had, I just wonder if type.getEnum values is underlying type of T underlying type, where it gives you back that bracket instead of theoretically an implementation could give back a multi-dimensional array here, or a VB non-SZ array, or like array is this weird thing.
Right, but at best we'd be able to take in T-enum, where T-enum is struct enum, and return an array anyways. You could theoretically take in a U, but that's just removing a forced cast that the user would have to do anyways, and it'd be a too generic scenario.
Yeah, I think the only reason why you
on
would
type it would be a one generic, because you already have the type instance. But
I mean, array has a bunch of useful methods like get value on it. If you wanted to enumerate the elements of the array, you could just do
That's fair.
a for each over it.
I'm like, if this is the type that we're happy with, I feel that often places that have the letters ARRAY they generally mean they want an SZ array, which means that it's not the best type to have used for that, but sometimes it's the best one we can use. So.
Right. The issue here is we've got one of 14 different types it could be.
Mm-hmm. And I mean, we would just document to implementers like, hey, you should return an SC array.
Sure. I mean, yeah. It's just, was there anything better we could do? And if the scenario says array is good enough, then I don't care a whole bunch. I just wanted to ask the question.
No, it's a good question, but I think the answer is no, unfortunately.
So then it would look like this. Would we be happy with that?
Sorry, did we say that it should be on both type and enum?
Yeah.
I would say
Okay.
that.
And
Yeah. Go ahead, Jeremy.
I thought on enum that any of the things that took type, we had overload to be generic, so that for one, constraints could stop you from passing in like type of string.
We've not
Yes.
done that for everything, and there's some that aren't available in like get values is conditioned to not be available for native AOT. Like it's compiled completely out of the source if you're for native AOT. So I think it's internal only today.
Yeah, and it wouldn't really work here anyway because you would have to specify both the T enum and the T underlying type in order to get back the SC array.
Yeah.
Which, if you don't know what the underlying type is, then you
Well,
can't call the API.
well, we could have it as public static array, get value as underlying type T enum, and then take no parameters, and then it just does the standard pattern of type of T enum is passed down to the other API.
Right,
Which
because I'm
then
looking
at
at get
least
name, get names, and get values are all. They have the one that takes type as a formal parameter and one that takes it as a generic parameter.
Right. It at least gives the guarantee that the user can't pass in something like action here.
Yeah, although
It
I
gives a
think it's
constraint
not.
that it's an actual enum.
I don't think that we are constraining it to an enum. I think most of them are constrained to just struct. Because I think when we added them, we didn't have the enum constraint, I believe.
APIs of .NET, you've rendered it a struct, comma, capital enum bang.
Yeah, all the
I
ones
guess.
I'm seeing are there's a couple that are just struct, like try parse, because that was added before.
Interesting. So I guess I rendered this incorrectly then. I probably should just say.
No. There's a mix. There's some that are just struct, like try parse, and there's others like get values, which are struct enum.
Yeah,
and
no,
I think
that
which
I believe.
it is depends.
I think though that if I would have to print it, like if you have a constraint for enum, like the lowercase keyword, I think I rendered as Jeremy just said, like t enum :struct, enum bang, which I don't think is the way to render it. I think I would have to basically say where t enum : lowercase enum probably would be my guess.
Lowercase enum doesn't work.
Oh really?
Yeah, no. The language explicitly doesn't allow a lowercase enum or a lowercase delegate. You have to use capital enum and capital delegate, and then if you want it to be only concrete instances of an enum, it's struct, comma, capital enum.
Wow. So I rendered it correctly then.
Yeah.
Good job, Emo.
The language explicitly didn't allow the lowercase because they wanted the freedom to be able to use that syntax in the future to mean something else.
What else would it mean? But okay.
You could potentially constrain it to something like enum int, and then constrain it to only be concrete enums of type int or things like that. I believe was one example.
I see. Well, no matter what we do here, so yes, we could do that. I mean, I'm okay with doing that. If you're in a generic context, it might be convenient. It's a bit weird to have a generic though, where you don't really have either, you don't return the value, nor do you accept the value that is constrained to that. But I guess that's fine. Unless there's objections to this, I'm okay with adding an overload to that. That follows the...
Yeah. I like it for the symmetry.
I can get behind that.
Yeah, because if we weren't going for symmetry, I think we would only add this on type and leave enum off entirely.
Right. All right, are we then happy with this API shape here?
I think so.
I assume Lakshan is still happy?
Yes, thank you.
Awesome, then let's improve this and move on with life.
I think chat's suggesting you're missing a plural.
I think chat is correct.
Gracias, Philip.
All right, then I think we're good with that one. Next one. Brennan, you're on.
Yeah. So this is a change to an existing API that was approved a few months ago. Which is where you can take an existing partition rate limiter of some resource type, and you can change it to a different resource type partition rate limiter. And the issue, or what we're trying to resolve here, is that to be safe, we have to assume that disposing the new partition rate limiter will not dispose the underlying wrapped partition rate limiter. And we want to have an option to basically allow you to specify whether we should dispose the wrapped one or not. So this is very similar to what we do with some stream implementations, where we have an option to say leave open or not. I linked to a couple here: SSL Stream, StreamWriter, Pipe Reader, etc. So yeah, the risks, I guess, are what if we want to start adding more options to this and have a bunch more overloads like we do for a bunch of the stream implementations. And I mean, currently, I can't think of any other options we'd potentially want to add in the future, but that is definitely a possible thing.
Yeah, I think we know how to evolve them though. Like that's a pretty common pattern that we have in the BCL now. We would basically just add another overload and then basically non-default this one here and then default the new one. And then this way it's well defined.
Gotcha.
Or
I mean,
add an option. That we would just add just add a new overload that takes one options instance that has all the stuff as properties on.
yeah, that's also possible.
Right. Okay.
So what is it closing when you pass false?
When you pass false to leave open, it'll just close the. Well, it's not really closing anything because it has no state really. So it's basically just like setting a dispose state on itself, and the inner one is left alone.
It basically controls ownership of the thing you're passing in, right?
Oh, sorry, leave open false. My bad. Leave open false will close the wrapped rate limiter. So translate key is on an instance of partition rate limiter. So it's returning a new instance that's just wrapping the current instance. So leave open means, or false, leave open false means we would close the wrapped one as well.
Yeah.
Okay. So this is because you're an instance of a partition rate limiter. It's returning a new instance of a partition rate limiter, and you're saying it's analogous to stream wrapping stream. Okay.
Yes.
What happens if you call translate key multiple times?
Like on the same one, or?
Yeah, is that not a thing?
I mean, sure, you could, and like if you had leave open false for all of those, then it would try to call dispose on the inner one multiple times, which is no op, I believe.
But it will close it while potentially others are still using it.
Yes.
And there's no like reference counting or anything like that.
Not today, no.
Right. Stream has the same issue.
Yes, but it's not a method on it. I can't think of any cases where we have leave open on a method that produces something else. It's always a constructor where you're basically passing ownership of something to the constructor of something else.
That's true. Yeah, I think that's why this felt weird, and I was asking what it really meant, because it's not. The leave open is usually talking about a sibling parameter, and in this case, the parameter is the invisible this.
Right.
But it's.
Yeah, that I agree is a bit of an interesting situation. I think the question becomes, is it obvious for the user that calling this method effectively transfers ownership? Because neither the method name nor the shape really communicates that. And it is the default, right? So if you look at the normal code flow, you just call translate key on a rate limiter. You don't pass anything in. And now you transferred ownership.
Oh, yeah. I mean, you could obviously switch the default, but still, that doesn't solve the other issues.
I mean, switching the default, I think, would probably be okay, because you can still have a call side that says comma true, which wouldn't be necessarily obvious either, but I guess most people would say leave open colon true, probably.
Right.
But I think that, yeah, I have zero experience using the API, so I really don't know what the expectations are, but it does seem a bit odd that, because most patterns, as Stephen and Jeremy observed, is you transfer ownership by passing the thing in your wrapping, right? So the wrapping is pretty obvious from the call side.
Yeah, I mean, leave open is certainly the name we have with stream, but as discussed, it gets a different usage pattern when we've used it. I wonder if a different name is warranted here of transfer ownership, cascade dispose.
SSL stream used a different name, but I don't know if it'll be helpful here because it's still doing the exact same thing other APIs are doing.
See, for streams, open and close makes sense though, right? Because it's kind of like analogous to a file, right?
Oh,
so,
is that what it is?
So you basically say just don't close the file. Versus here, you're like you basically use it as a way to say, do I call dispose or does somebody else call dispose, right?
Yeah, and for stream, and they have close as an alias for dispose. So leave open is don't close, which is don't dispose. And here, yeah, you don't have a notion of what being open means.
Leave inner rate limiter open.
Yeah.
Because SSL stream is leave inner stream, yeah.
I mean, your scenario makes certainly sense, right? It's just that the way you express it is unfortunate.
Right.
But I also don't have really great other ideas because I think we really wanted this pattern where it's an instance method, right? Wasn't it? I have not looked at the API in a while, but
yeah.
And of course, I'm looking at the wrong type.
I mean, how would people feel about cascade dispose equal true?
I feel I have a mixed mind. The leave open terminology is well understood. And it does effectively mean the same thing here. I think part of my objection to it was it's hidden by being default. Maybe if it were not defaulted and everyone was required to specify it, it would be more obvious.
Yeah. I mean, could it be a static method somewhere? Does it have to be an instance method?
It could be a static method on the static partition rate limiter class, the non-TC resource one.
Because you already have create and create change, right? So it wouldn't be insane
Right.
to have something like create wrapped or something, right? Where it's pretty obvious what this thing will do.
Mm-hmm.
Or maybe this method needs a different name. Maybe somehow highlight the fact that it's wrapping this, because translate key sounds like it's doing some, transient operation or whatever. It doesn't sound like, at least to my ears, it doesn't sound like it's creating a new thing that wraps the current thing and basically says you should never use the current thing again.
Yeah, I agree with that. And this goes back to your, can you not call it multiple times? It feels sort of like I have a limiter based on some shape of a key, but I need to expose it to somebody else with another shape. But I'm not giving them my rate limiter. I'm giving them the ability to use my rate limiter. So them disposing a thing that I give them doesn't make sense to dispose my thing to me with this verb.
Well, it does and it doesn't, right? That's kind of exactly the same problem with streams, right? When you combine them, you may only return one thing. So at that point, it makes sense that this thing now transitively disposes the whole chain, right?
But the verb was, combine, or you said build a new stream based on this other stream. And again, for stream, we have this constructor pattern with leave open.
Right.
It's the combination of this particular name of just translate and the notion that it's changing ownership. That's a very weak link in my mind.
Yeah, so I agree with everything you said. I'm just saying from a scenario standpoint, like the scenario where you just basically say translate somebody's key, I think the default is probably the correct one, right? Because you just say, oh, this has the wrong shape, so let me adjust the shape and then give you back the wrapper, and then the wrapper basically will dispose the inner thing. That is probably what most people want. So in that sense, I have no objection to what the API does by default, but it does seem like if you're in the 1 or 2% case where it doesn't do what you want, it's not obvious that it did that, right? So I think if we have a static method somewhere, it would be a bit more discoverable that you create something new and you pass the other thing explicitly in, so at least you see what's going on, and that would be closer to where our streams are as well.
Maybe. I mean, it. What's the scenario for translate keys in the first place? Because if I wanted to give ownership, it feels like I would have created it the right way. The fact that I built it one way and need to give somebody else an instance in some other way does suggest that I still want to own my rate limiter to me.
The primary use case I'm targeting is a library author provides a rate limiter, maybe like stringly typed or something. So like they have policy names, and then you want to use it, for example, in HTTP context, and so you need to use this to convert it. Yeah, as far as like disposing theirs,
So your scenario is a library exposes one and is an app I want to consume it. And the way that I was looking at it is I, as the app, have built one that makes sense for my app, but I need to pass it into a library because it wants to reference the rate limiter, which is when you would want leave open true or cascade dispose false. It's if the app created it, I think the app wants to own it.
I think you got that the other way. The library created it. You want to use it in your app with a different
Well, that was your scenario. The one that I was picturing by looking at this was I, in my application, started up, and I have this rate limiter that's bound to some resource that I own, and then I'm calling into some library that's like I can make use of a rate limiter, but I key it off of the HTTP context. It's like, well, fine. Given an HTTP translate, you give me your HTTP context, and I'll turn it back into the int that I was using as an identifier. Mm-hmm. But it's my rate limiter. You don't own it. I'm just giving you a way that you can access my rate limiter. And so the ownership really feels like it always belongs with the app, but I don't know that the app would understand that. Because really this is bool, am I the app?
I mean, really, like, this method is select, right? Logically, right?
Ish. Yeah.
So, I mean, it really behaves like the link select, right? Where you just say, I have something, I need something else, which is either a conversion or I just access an element of it, right?
Right. Except to my knowledge, none of our link enumerables cascade their disposes.
I think they do, right? Basically the outer enumerable would dispose the inner enumerable, right? Logically, right? I mean, by the sheer act that it enumerates it, right? Because it's just for each statement is all the way down.
Because for each does at least opportunistic dispose.
Yeah, I think I forgot what it is, but I think there's this idea that you could implement iDisposable and then it will do that.
Right. So select array iterator is transitively iDisposable, but it never tries cascading that back to the source. It just, if you call dispose, it refuses to move next. So if we think this is link, then it should not be or if you think of it like link, it should not be transferring ownership because link doesn't transfer ownership.
Oh, I'm really confused. Maybe I'm taking this the wrong way, but in my head it made sense that it disposes all the way down.
I mean, unless I'm missing something, but select array iterator doesn't explicitly override dispose. Iterator of T.
No, I mean
is a base class of it, and its dispose just says state equal -1.
No, I'm just thinking how you would, if you naively just say select just takes an enumerable, right? Logically select just does it for each, right? And then applies the func to the element, and then yield returns that one. And so logically, the select method will enumerate the given enumerable, and then it will dispose the enumerator as it gets values out of this guy, right? But I guess the difference is that the enumerable itself isn't disposable, right? Only the enumerator is, right? And so I guess that's because basically logically the method basically gets a resource and then immediately disposes it. So that's not the same here, because here you dispose the actual thing that's being given. So it is more analogous to how streams work. So link is kind of a red herring, I guess.
Yeah. So I guess it does dispose the enumerator, but it doesn't dispose the enumerable. But the select method itself created the enumerator.
Yeah, I don't think we have a concept of a disposable enumerable, right? We only have the concept of a disposable enumerator. Yeah. And the enumerator logically is acquired by the methods. So
there's something with the for each pattern. If the enumerable is disposable, it will call dispose on it. Or if it doesn't, if it can't prove it can't, then it writes an as cast for dispose.
No, I think this is only true for the enumerator. I don't think that's true for the enumerable.
Okay. It's been a while since I had to.
Because for each doesn't change the enumerable, right? It just calls get enumerator, and then it calls move next on that guy, and that's the thing that's being disposed.
Yep. I'm thinking of the enumerator, not the enumerable.
Yeah, it was the same mistake I made. So it's
for each is twice as complicated as anybody gives it credit for.
It's actually worse if you look at how many shapes of for each the compiler supports.
Yeah.
Anyway, so so then what's the suggestion here? I honestly I still like the factory proposal, because it kind of already exists. You already have a place for it. And that would be the closest we have.
So to you, the fact that you're invoking it in a static manner, is that just that it feels more like a constructor, so you can believe ownership is being transferred, as opposed to the instance method where it...
Yes, because there's no this, right? You literally pass the thing in, and then at that point, to Stephen's point, we could decide to make leave open an explicit parameter too, right? At which point you pass the thing in, you say leave open false, and then it's like, well, you just said transfer ownership.
Yeah, a non-extension static feels closer to a constructor pattern, so it makes it. I agree. It feels closer to the right answer there.
So if we moved it to the static class, you have to now specify all 3 T's when you call it, or use a strongly typed lambda? Would that work instead?
Oh, I see what you're saying, because now the method would be generic over 2 arguments, right? It would be T resource, T outer.
It would figure out, so inference would allow it to work. T resource can be inferred from the
passed in,
the wrapped.
Yeah.
And then the outer can be inferred from the signature of the delegate.
Yes, so you'd have to put the type in the delegate arg.
I mean, it would work with a lambda. Like it does a lot of loops to try and make inference work. It's the exact same way it works with this, right? You would just end up with so the T resource would get bound from whatever the first parameter's type is, and then T outer it would figure out by what the lambda is returning. And then it would say, I now know what all the types are, and then it would lock it. So.
Oh, because it's from the return value. Okay, yeah.
Yeah. Yes, if it had a floating input.
Yeah, I was thinking the input was the weird thing, but no, it's not.
Well, actually, because func is input, it's comma output, right?
Input, yes. Wait.
But it can't be, because it returns a partition rate limiter of T outer.
Yeah, okay. So yes, the func is called to call the inner limiter, which is, so yeah, the return value isn't actually important for the inference. It's the thing it accepts.
But anyway,
So
I think if it accepts it right, if inference works right now, it will continue working. And if it, but the problem is it looks like it doesn't work right now.
So basically, I think you'd have to.
So you'd have to specify both arguments because you can't do partial
Right.
specification.
Sorry, inference
Yeah, you'd
doesn't
have to-
work because the lambda usually use the lambda, and the lambda is not typed, so you would have to either type the lambda or type the generic, right?
Both
Right.
generics, yeah.
Yes, if you put the type in the signature of the lambda, or you were binding it to a function instead of a lambda, then it could figure it out. But
Right.
Since the floating generic here is the input parameter to the func, the lambda can't resolve it using a classical open lambda thing.
Yeah, that kind of sucks. That one I would believe is not pretty at that point. So then how about we go back to the original design and just say you need to specify leave open.
Always.
Yeah. Then I think that's the closest we have for being explicit. And then maybe we can choose a different name.
Propagate, I suppose.
Well, I think the parameter is actually fine. I would consider a different method name.
Yeah, but I mean, the best I'm coming up with is wrap and translate key. Just to throw in there that really wrapping is what this method is doing.
Yeah.
Which is true, but I don't. I mean,
Yeah.
the fact that it's called wrap maybe helps explain why leave open is there, but I don't know that it's a super better name.
I mean, honestly, create wrapped is also not terrible, right? Because you still, like, the argument is called key adapter, so you can either specify x goes to x, in which case it does nothing, or you say, you know, x goes to x dot some property, right? Or conversion, whatever you want to do.
Fair enough.
Like, unless there's a massive objection to create wrapped.
I'm not against it.
But you're also not excited about it.
I mean, it sounds better than wrap and translate key.
I mean, just as an instance method, I think you can just call it wrap.
I think the problem with wrap is it could start doing other things potentially in the future. Like, it's very generic, right?
It is. It really comes down to, like, where's your emphasis, right? Is your emphasis on the fact that something is being wrapped, or is your emphasis on something is being, you know, converted, right? And I guess logically, you know, translate key makes sense because that's probably the reason why you want to call the API, right? But then the implementation detail is, well, we're trying to, or the intent of the user is I want to just change the key from something to something else, right? So it's a bit unfortunate that the implementation detail is more or less the API name.
Create translated. I don't know.
Yeah. Yeah. Maybe translate key with leave open as explicit argument is good enough after all.
Yep.
What about something like with key?
So you broke up with translated key, is that what you said?
Yeah, kind of make it a wither, you know, which is sort of an understood pattern for creating derivations.
That's not bad. Yeah, I think I like that. I mean, with to me doesn't really express that there is a wrapping, because usually with means that you get something brand new, but there is an expectation that you effectively create a copy, right? Like usually the end result of a wither is something that is detached from the thing you invoked it on. You just use it as an initialization thing, right?
Yeah, I think we can use with because that does mean make a new thing, but I think we would still leave it as a required parameter because letting you know that it's not detached. And that something complicated is going on.
Yeah. So how would you call it with translated key, I guess?
That's what I was suggesting, but yeah, at the end of the day, I don't care super strongly. I guess I'm assuming, Brennan or Stefan, that we expect very few people to actually use this. So we're talking about a very small percentage of users will have to figure out what this means.
Yeah, and if we don't if no one feels with translated key is a much stronger name than just keeping it with the name it is, and anybody who's already started using it gets the I'm sorry, you haven't specified the second parameter. And it's an easier upgrade path.
I like with translated.
All right.
All right, so then, since you're the owner, with translated key it is.
And required param, yeah.
Yeah. All right. That works. Then let me go back to all right, next one. David, I think you're on.
Yeah. So this is an addition to existing APIs that were approved recently. Basically, for this, for the COSE work that we did for the signed messages, there is need for exposing a couple of byte arrays that we have internally. The reason for this is that we want to enable some scenarios that we don't want to directly support, which is counter signatures. And the reason we don't want to support them is because the spec is not clear, and the second spec, the version 2 of the spec is not finished. I think it's marked as draft. But we still want to allow people to build them if they want to, and for that we need to make it easy for that. We want to expose the encoded protected headers as a byte array and the signature bytes as byte array as well, and that's pretty much what you need to build them. And for that we just want, so in the hierarchy you have COSE message that can be a COSE sign, one a COSE multi-sign, and in the future it can also be a COSE encrypt or COSE MAC. So this first API encoded protected headers is shared across all three types, so it wouldn't be a problem for the future. So it's kind of future proof. And for the sign, for the signature bytes, those are specific to COSE sign 1 and COSE signature, which is a struct inside of COSE multi-sign. So yeah, that's basically it.
So we now have a certain number of patterns where we basically have already a strongly typed version of something, and then we want to expose them as the raw bytes as well. I think the other places we just suffixed it with bytes. I think Jeremy didn't like that, but I kind of like that as a pattern.
I see.
I think signature bytes would be fine, but encoded protected headers bytes feels weird because encoded and bytes kind of mean the same thing.
No, I mean the existing API is protected headers, so I would just have protected headers and bytes, as opposed to encoded protected headers.
Yeah, that's fair.
Or I think I was looking at the time to I think it was called sign CMS, which used a method called get signature, and that was returning a byte array. That was and it's using a method because at that time read-only memory was not part of .NET.
Right.
I just wanted to point out why I went for signature rather than signature bytes.
Yeah, I guess signature would work because there's nothing else right now that exposes the signature, right? It would
But-
just be if you have something strongly typed, then that would be unfortunate. But I guess signature is always going to be bytes, so maybe it's fine.
Maybe you can scroll at the sample at the usage. Can you the third method? I think it's called get to be signed. What kind of concerns me is that it happens something as you described, where you have like a signature, then you will do a signature.signature. So that kind of sounds weird. So maybe signature.signature bytes will be better.
I mean, frankly, we could just call it bytes, right? If you're already on, but you're already standing on the signature, right? So like
right, but if you're looking at a COSE signature and you have a property called bytes, is that the bytes of the signature field within the signature structure, or is that the bytes of the signature structure that was encoded? I think bytes would be a bad.
Yeah, to me, bytes would imply it's the entire thing as bytes, but I guess based on your question, that seems that's not what it is.
Yes.
Right.
Yeah,
the
that's a
class called COSE signature is representing a type in the spec called COSE signature, and the COSE signature type has a field called signature, which is a byte array.
So I guess then signature bytes might be better indeed, yeah. Signature.signature bytes seems reasonable, but also signature to signature is also reasonable if that's what the spec calls both things, right? So it wouldn't be redundant at that point.
Yeah.
So then what's the conclusion?
I don't know. I'm think protected header bytes and signature bytes sounds good to me. Jeremy?
I'm fine with either name for either of them. I feel like something in my language neural net says protected headers bytes sounds weirds, and I'll just keep throwing S's on things to indicate where all the weirdnesses are coming from. But I don't super care.
Yeah, I agree. Header bytes would be nicer, but headers bytes.
And you
could also go for blob as a suffix, but
I mean, we could also protected header if we wanted it to be unified on IntelliSense aligning them. Protected headers encoded isn't bad.
The only reason I don't like encoded is because it's long and we don't use it anywhere else. I mean, we usually use bytes. I think we have raw as well somewhere else, I think.
Yep. Right, and so the other common so raw protected headers would be we have prior art in crypto of this is what the value was and we're not interpreting it for you.
Right. Which I guess is all the same, right? Because basically it just here's the original blob of bytes, right?
Right. And in the case of protected headers, that's what it is. It's we read it out of the file. These were the bytes that were there. We're going to give you a struct so you can actually, or we're going to give you an object so you can see what it meant, but here's what it said. So the raw prefix would apply here. I don't know if we've ever used raw as a suffix, but we could.
What about raw signature? Wouldn't that be ambiguous, as what we were discussing before about referring to the whole struct?
For signature, I wouldn't call it raw.
Oh, okay.
Because
right,
we're not interpreting it. We're just extracting it. So raw would just be if we wanted to replace encoded with raw and protected headers, whether it be raw protected headers or protected headers raw.
And
protected headers bytes is the only thing I kind of object to, but not strenuously.
So then maybe let's check a signature first, because I mean we can just leave signature as is because it seems unlikely that we ever have something more strongly typed anyway, because the whole point is that it's just bytes and the spec calls it just signature. So I think just leaving it as signature seems fine. then the only thing you have is signature, but then arguably that's what the spec did. So here you go, right? Which now leaves us with just protected headers where we already have protected headers, right? So now we can choose a suffix or a prefix. I agree that the plural suffix was unfortunate. So I would probably either go with, either protected headers raw or raw protected headers, and which one I don't really care for too much. And it seems we already have the prior art that we have it as a prefix, so I can go with a prefix here.
Sounds fine to me. So raw protected headers and signature.
Yep. Actually, now I have it made substantially worse. Copy paste for the win. Here we go.
Ooh.
Actually, no, let me fix one more thing here. All right. Done. Sweet. Next one. Event bookmark is internal. Who has context on this one?
I can speak to that.
All right.
So this issue is about that you can extract this event bookmark type, but it's just an opaque object at the moment, so that you can jump to a different position in your event stream. But at the moment, you can't really round trip it. You can't serialize it, and you can't load from it because the constructor at the moment is internal and the property is not exposed. When you scroll a bit further down, you can see the API proposal. Yeah, here it is. So in the usage, you can see that with the added API, you can now create this event bookmark type, and then the event log reader accepts the bookmark so that it jumps to that position. And the example, like the usage that Hoang, I think it's Hoang, shared is that they have an agent program that sends Windows events to a backend, and that backend is often starting and stopping unexpectedly, but as expected. And so they want to persist that bookmark, and then so when the agent boots up again, so that they can continue where they stopped at a certain position in the event log. One more note, but Hoang decided to add new APIs for that, but we could also, he mentioned that in the alternative design, we could also just expose the constructor and expose the property.
So currently it's, I guess this was here, right? So currently the shape is, it's just a property as, so this guy here basically?
Yeah. Wait, this is event record. We're talking about event bookmark.
I see. Yeah, I mean, so it's a bit weird that the type only has a method on it and there's nothing else on it. Like, I mean, is there no sensible thing for this?
Yeah, the current state is even a bit weirder because at the moment it's just an opaque object and does not have any property or method in it. So it's just kind of a placeholder.
So yeah, we do we do have a few places in the framework where we have opaque objects, but I don't think we expose discrete types for them. I think for the most part, we just pass them around as object. So this is interesting. So why do you need to be able to turn this to a string and back? You're serializing it, right?
Yeah. So the author he would like to serialize it to a string so that they can terminate the process, and then when they boot up, they want to pass in the string so that they can deserialize it.
So this represents the tuple of the event stream plus the location within the stream where you are.
It's XML, but don't ask me exactly what it is.
So is the XML here actually like a public spec that people would expect to, handle as XML, or is the idea that, you have an event bookmark, you just have a way to get a string, and a string is just convenient, and then you can create it from this, or is there an expectation that, oh yeah, that's a well-defined format and people expect to do something useful with it?
I think that in the Win32 API, it's a well-defined format, of course, because they pass it to you, but I don't think that we have this well-defined format anywhere in the framework.
I see. Well, if it is a well-defined format, then I think it's fine to actually have an API like get bookmark XML and also create from bookmark XML. That makes sense. If it would just be, oh, we just wanted to give you the ability to serialize it, then there's other ways of doing it.
Yeah, well, I mean, this would be the way to write serialization capabilities around it. You need the methods first.
Yeah, I mean, this is
right.
At one point in time, I actually knew the name of when they replaced the event system. Thankfully, I've forgotten it. But like, if you go in Event Viewer and any version of Windows that's still supported, and you go to filter the view, it'll build this nice filter for you. But there's another tab of XML, and that's actually just showing what's the underlying query that's driving the system. It's an XML keyed query language, and so presumably the bookmark is going to give something back which contains something along the lines of path, which is the name of the event source and all the nonsense in that. So I think this sounds like it's just part of the EVTX system, and they're going to give us the string, and then somebody can give it back to us in the create, and the answer of what is the format for this string is find a coherent spec from Windows, and you get it. But
right,
like if you find, I'm looking at an article right now, advanced XML filtering in the Windows Event Viewer, and it talks about some of the things you can do, but you can build incredibly complicated queries.
So
Crimson, that's what it's called. Damn it, I remembered.
So event bookmark is currently not a public API, right? So the
type is public and has no members and has a non-public constructor. So
yeah, in full framework, the type was serializable, so that's how you would transmit it back and forth.
Interesting. Okay.
I see.
Yeah, so that was the thing I was missing. So like if the type already exists, then I think the API shape makes sense. If the type wouldn't have existed, I would have suggested instead of having event log reader taking a bookmark, we could have just changed event log reader to take XML, like query comma bookmark XML, and then we could have record get bookmark XML, right? But if the type already exists and we have APIs that take the bookmark, then it makes sense to just expose those members.
Yeah, and that because I think the title of this is weird because it's saying that the type is internal, but really it's upset that the constructor is internal.
Right.
Because in one of the samples it showed reading like, yeah, record.bookmark.getBookmark XML, and I'm like, well, there's no proposal here for record.bookmark. It's because that one already exists.
Right. The only suggestion I have, and I feel not super strongly, but I would probably change create to parse.
Yeah, so that was one of my questions. Are we in favor of adding those new APIs, or should we just expose the internal ones as public?
Well, expose internal as public is never the right answer.
I mean, there's really no benefit of making the internal ones public without changing them. Like, once you make things public, renaming them or changing shape seems fine to me. Like, it's just, I mean, there's really no benefit from a public API standpoint to just keep them as is. So you might as well make them nice.
Right.
I mean, to me, like, create is not bad. It's just when you take a string and you create a strongly typed object out of it, I mean, that's usually called parse. So I would just go with that, I guess.
But we're not parsing it, though. We're literally taking it and passing it to the operating system as a raw handle, or as an opaque piece of text, and then it does God knows what with it.
Right, and then because if the XML is bad or uses nodes that aren't supported, then I feel like parse should fail. But if Windows is lazy and isn't going to evaluate it until you start iterating the event log reader, then they're going to throw it a weird time, and it's your fault for having given them gibberish previously.
Fair enough.
So
yeah, like I'm looking at the documentation, I'm looking at the implementation, and I don't know if this API is intended to handle arbitrary input. So let's just assume for this that the input has to be trusted, and we would document it as such.
So does the event bookmark just have a field that effectively is the XML, or is there anything more complicated happening?
In full framework, it just has a field that is the XML.
Yeah, and I'm tracing where that goes to, and it's hard to find.
Well, at that point, why don't just have a constructor that takes XML and a property called XML and then call it good? Because at that point, it's pretty clear what's happening. Right? You create a bookmark, you pass it the text, it holds the text. That's all it does. It's just a strongly typed string at that point.
No, it's not. It's actually, when you construct these things, it's actually going down like to the operating system and doing something. Like, it's not just a simple data holder.
So you're saying when you call event bookmark.create, we take the XML and do something with it more than just creating an event bookmark that assigns it to the field?
No.
Like if you create one from a streaming context and framework, it just assigns the field and it's done. It never moved on past that.
It just assigns the field, but the one and only API that actually takes it, reads the field, and hands it to the OS for processing.
Right, which is that event log reader.
Yes.
Uses it, but the type itself just says it's a holder of the event XML.
But you would never create an instance of this type if you didn't plan on passing it to the reader.
Right.
Yeah, my point is just, but basically just having a constructor and having a property, it kind of makes it clear that you don't really expect validation to happen when you call the constructor. You expect validation to happen to the thing that you pass it to. It's kind of like our strongly typed enums, right? If you construct an enum with an arbitrary operating system,
I do want to caution that the word validation is being thrown loosely here. We don't actually know any validation takes place.
Right, we send it blindly into the Crimson reader, and then Crimson gets upset whenever and however it feels like doing so.
My point is just that the API shape we currently have on screen looks more like something is happening, right? Because you call it static factory method. And I'm saying by making it a constructor, you kind of make it clear that less is happening, right? You just pass the data through, basically, right?
Yeah. So then make it public and seal it then, since it's just a strongly typed string holder.
Well, we can't seal it because the type already exists as an unsealed, right? So that would be.
But it has an internal only constructor. You can seal it.
It cannot be derived because no one can call base.
Fair enough. Then let's seal that type. All right. So then public sealed event bookmark, public event bookmark string bookmark XML, I guess.
No. So the existing constructor should be, like the existing constructor is already a string constructor. Should be. If you just expose that,
Well, right. We're going to expose it, but we're going to not take its name of bookmark text. We're going to call it bookmark XML.
Okay.
Like, when internal things become public, they get redesigned. We don't just flip the word internal to public.
That's fair.
Yeah. And consider the scenario as to why you're doing this. Like, make sure that if you're doing this for the express purpose of passing it across security boundaries, like you're actually documenting what assumptions are made. Because we're talking serialization here, right? The entire point of serialization is to cross a security boundary. There's literally no reason other than that to serialize anything.
I mean, you may not be thinking of it as crossing a security boundary. You may think of it as you'd like your process to go nap, but that does mean you happen to cross a security boundary.
Correct.
Should we
As an
rename?
implementation, the thing you're going to do is cross one. Yeah.
Should we rename the property to just XML, or should we keep the name bookmark? It seems a bit redundant because when you say bookmark.bookmark XML, but I don't also care too much. Oopsie.
Yeah, I like leaving the bookmark in. It gives us. I don't think we're ever going to add something to it, but it gives us wiggle room later.
Fair.
Works for me. All right, then done. Next one is add API to check a process has administrator privileges. Environment is privileged process. Anybody here that can talk to process?
I can say there's always the good old what does privileged and elevated and administrator mean problem that such an API would have to solve.
Yeah. The way that I've normally seen this implemented is on Windows, you check for the existence of a specific token, and on non-Windows, you check for like UID equals 0 or whatever it is.
Right. I assume it's on Windows you're looking for your member of built-in administrators, which only gets added to your group token if you're in an elevated content, or if UAC is on, then you have to be in the UAC run as administrator to get that.
Yeah, there's a specific split token attached to the process that you can query for, like SC whatever.
An SC something.
Yeah.
Privilege.
You can see it in Process Monitor, but we would probably just check for the same thing on Windows.
And then on Unix it usually means UID 0. But
yeah, which kind of seems what is written here as well. So yeah. I mean, I don't know about Linux, but I mean on Windows we usually refer to this as elevated, not privileged. So I guess the internal API that he shows here seems more aligned with what I would expect the name to be.
Elevated is a Windows-ish concept, though, because elevated implies that you start off with low privilege and then you elevate your own privilege within the current process.
I see.
It's different than sudo and other tools which just launch the process as privileged because they run it under a privileged system account.
So is there no Unix or Linux flavor that has the same UAC concept where you can elevate after the fact?
God, I hope not.
No, because both full SU and the thing that everyone calls sudo, which is really sudo, but sudo, is that process creates itself as root, figures out who it's supposed to be in a trustworthy, we hope, manner, and then does the thing it's supposed to do. Whether SU, which is just give you a new interactive logon, or sudo, which is do a thing and then exit the process that ran as root, which could run itself as whatever user it wanted. So on Unix, you are root, and root can become someone else freely, or you have to create a new process to then become root.
And then I think on Mac, I've seen, like, at least in the control panel, they have this notion of a lock in the UI, where you have to click the lock and then it asks for the password of the admin, and then you can actually make changes. But I have no idea whether it's just a UI thing or whether there's actually something more sophisticated happening.
Yeah, I feel like from the command line when there are things like that on Mac, the answer is that you have to sudo it, and that they just have some UI shininess of
I believe that.
Understanding this system thing requires admin rights. You're in the wheel group. Give me your password and I'll sudo you.
Yep.
Gotcha. Yeah, I mean, if the only operating system that has this concept of elevation is Windows, then I think this privileged process is probably the right way of doing it. If there is more than one that has this concept of elevation, then I would probably go with elevation just because it's the more nuanced concept, right? But I guess
and we would just document very specifically what we're looking for too, because it's entirely possible that the common case, our answer will be like, if you want to try to do something, just do it and see if it fails. Because there will be cases where you're privileged, but this API will return false.
Right.
Well, on Unix, can't you fork and set UID with the right token?
I mean, you can, but then it's still a new process, right?
Well, yes, but it inherits all of the state, including the memory, the initialized values, etc. So, like, for all intents and purposes, if you fork, kill the original process, and you've set the UID to something new, it's effectively equivalent to having elevated the process just using Unixisms.
I guess. I mean,
Is this like the process of Theseus?
But I think you can go from root down, but I don't think you can go from down up to root in a fork. Because there's no way that you could prove that you have the rights to do it.
I thought there were APIs that allowed you to validate that you had the relevant rights.
Because like the notion of like, the wheel group or the sudoers file, etc., those are all notions that are tied to the pseudo program.
right.
Like your process could have been launched with root rights, did set EUID to a lower privilege, and then might still hold enough root rights to come back or to fork as root again, but you had to have started with root rights. I don't think a standard user process can ever acquire root rights to fork. And maybe I'm wrong. Maybe there's a thing that's essentially Windows impersonation on Linux. I don't know of it.
Right, and that is something that I would imagine our API would not care about. Like if your process has system level permissions, but you happen to be impersonating a different user on Windows, we would still return true because your process does have the system token.
Right. Yes, because
that said, accessing system stuff might fail if you happen to be under an impersonation context, but whatever.
Right, because the thing proposed is asking is the process privilege, not the thread or any of the other things that can change permissions on Windows.
Yeah.
I mean,
so ultimately, I think a lot of it will again come down to just try doing what you're trying to do, and if it fails, it fails.
Indeed. Yes, it's an API of low utility, but
so some background on this is this API came out of me investigating why people are p-invoking into POSIX APIs, and this came up as a relatively common use case that they're calling get EUID and checking for 0. I can get the list of places if people are interested.
Yeah, to me, it kind of makes sense. I mean, I understand why you would say, this thing is basically meant to be kind of like an installer or hookup script, and you just want to say, you can only run me with admin privileges. I don't care what permissions you have, but I don't want to be run by accident.
I would not recommend telling people to use this API as a block against anything. If there are cases that we understand where this API will return false even though you are privileged. So if we tell people call this API and then fail if it returns false, I think that will lead to a bad user experience. What we could do is we could tell people try the operation. If it fails, then query this API and use it to maybe display a better reason to people.
Yeah, I mean, I can certainly see things like, apt-get doing it as a precondition check unless there's a local install flag. It's like, I'm going to need to touch a whole lot of files, and I just want to know ahead of time I'm going to have permission to do things. You need to be root. I'm not going to go edit the first file and then find out I couldn't edit the second and need to do a rollback. So for command line utilities as a precondition, I guess it makes sense, but this is weird for a library unless they're using it as customizing an exception message.
That's kind of what I was thinking too. Is like, I have some scripts that do some non-trivial stuff, and I don't want to have it fail in the middle of it. But I guess you have to deal with that somehow. But yeah, I mean, rollback is hard, right? So that's why I would do the same thing. But I mean, I don't have objections to it. I mean, like, we don't really think of .NET as an installation level tool anyway, so I think it's fine. I mean, the API has fairly well-defined behavior. Like the way it's outlined here is probably how we would implement it anyway. So I think it's understood what it would do. We can document it, and then, yeah, we're not really making any predictions on what permissions you have. We're just saying, are you the operating system equivalent of running with admin?
So I guess really the main question is environment the right class to stick it on?
I think so, because I mean, like, we don't want to put it on process because process get current is expensive, and we added a bunch of stuff to environment from process, like, you know, process name or process path, whatever the thing is we added recently, and there already have you know, a variety of other process related APIs on it already.
Yep, I guess we have is 64-bit process. We have the PID. What's the process path? So
yeah.
All right. Yeah.
So then I guess, unless there's more objections, I would say it looks good as proposed. Sweet. All right, done. Trim related stuff. Who can talk to this one?
I just asked Jeremy Kern if he is able to join a meeting, but I don't think he can. Let me know if you need anything specific. There's already a PR open, and then we asked Kent to first open this issue so that we can talk about it.
And the APIs look reasonable. I have zero idea what a log font is, though.
I mean, apparently we already have a system drawing font, 2log font, but it takes an object log font. So yeah, I think this is making it generic instead of object.
Right, the same API already exists. Can you tell me why this avoids the trim warnings by making it generic?
Well, I guess because it's not object based, right? So it's, as soon as you have object based APIs, you basically lose type information, right?
Right. This is struct based then because it filters on struct and unmanaged.
Yeah. So I think the idea is, if you, like, I assume the existing API has something like, okay, the log font API is internal. We the only ones calling it, and so we are basically we hold the struct, we type it to object, and then we pass it in, and then the other side casts it back to the original struct that we know, and then does something. But that now means that, as far as the linker is concerned, like, it doesn't know what the target does. I think that's the whole, like, linker annotations, that everything when you do an upcast, and then the other side does some reflection or downcasting down the road, then you would have to do something with that.
I see. That makes sense, yeah.
I mean, I can, like, what is the existing API? It's 2log font.
Yeah.
Looks like it's just object.
And then it must write through the box.
Mm-hmm.
So it's using object and magic as a way of doing ref.
Yeah, it's doing this rather than what it likely should have done, which is graphics, and then out, and then actually expose the Win32 log font struct, or an equivalent that it marshaled from.
Yeah, I think we need to bounce this one back to Jeremy to talk about the T here.
Yeah. That works. Then let's skip this one for now. Jeremy, I assume you can talk to this one.
Yeah. So when we were first spanifying, everything, but in particular the crypto types, the span writing things got try versions, but we didn't get, like, we didn't do the full matrix of things. So on newer types, we have things like, so here we have encrypt reading from a span and returning an array as a convenience method. And then the second, where we have the int returning one. Right now, we only have try encrypt, and the fact that it's try encrypt means you should care about the false path. But oftentimes, we're calling it in places that we've pre-allocated the size, and we quote unquote know it's not going to throw. And so then we call like try encrypt, or if not try encrypt, debug.fail, throw unreachable exception. And if we had the non-try version that did that throw for us, if for somehow we screwed up basic arithmetic, then our call sites would get a lot cleaner. So this is just completing the span matrix of sign and encrypt.
And assume statics don't make sense here. I thought because the other ones I thought have static methods like, you know, SHA1.hash or something, right?
So the hash algorithms do have statics, but the like RSA is you need the instance because that tells you what the key is.
Yeah, that's what I meant. So like this it does make sense. So then they're all static, then they're all non-static.
Right, and all of these can be written in terms of the existing, try encrypt and try sign data and try sign hash.
Gee, holy shit, has this many APIs.
Yeah. To your point, Emo, I think we did add APIs on HMAC that took the key as the first parameter, where we took the key as like a single byte array or a span of byte or something like that. In this case, we would have to take the RSA key as the first parameter. But like Jeremy said, it's this.
Yeah. All right, then I guess this makes sense. And I assume they're both the same, RSA and ECDSA in terms of shape, right? They just have the corresponding types.
ECDSA doesn't have encrypt and decrypt, but otherwise, yes.
Yeah.
And I think we already made these changes to the symmetric algorithm types, right? I think.
I think so. I think this one is literally when we were starting to put span in places. I think Steve, in fact, is the one who did it for RSA, and it was, well, we have a thing that takes in a byte array and returns some bytes, so let's add this version that reads from a span and writes to a span, and that was try encrypt, and we called it a day, and then now we're like 5 years later, and we've been adding all these other convenient overloads of call whichever one suits your shape. And
all right, then I guess here we go. So now we are out of, I think, items for 7. We just did this one here. So this one is we need Jeremy, and these ones are scheduled for Thursday. And then the only thing missing is command line, but that's a dedicated review.
You want to try for your SP800 HMAC, Levi? Sounds like no.
I had muted myself, so I could if you really want me to. Since, sure, I did. The thing is, like, I had originally scheduled it for .NET 7, but punted it recently because there was no way we could get it in time. And it is not marked red.
This one here?
Yeah. So, sure, let's talk about it. SP800-108. It is a series of key derivation functions. Key derivation being you start off with some master key, shared secret, something along those lines, and you use it to create a bunch of little subkeys for various purposes. For example, one thing that ASP.NET currently uses this for is in full framework ASP.NET, when you set a machine key, you set a single large key, and we need to both encrypt and sign using that key. So what we do is we use SP800-108 to derive an encryption key, and then we use it again to derive a different signing key. So now we have 2 keys securely created from some single master. ASP.NET Core's data protection stack does something very similar, but it's a slightly different code path. That said, this algorithm is something that we've received requests from significant partner teams and the crypto board to implement, because a lot of internal teams are using this algorithm, and we don't have a public API for them. They're basically copying and pasting from other known good implementations, and it would be great if we could just make their lives easier. So that's kind of the context behind all of this. The inputs to SP800-108 are, we do HMAC counter mode key derivation. So the inputs are the master key, and all of these are, the master key is just a binary blob, a byte array. There's also a label and a context, which are opaque parameters that describe how the derivation is to take place. They're literally just binary blobs. For convenience, we have overloads that can take both the binary blobs or human readable text. The human readable text overloads literally just turn it into UTF-8 and call the byte array based overloads. They literally don't mean anything outside of the application that you're using to call it. Like, pass whatever values you want to there, we don't care. The other parameters that you need are how long of a derived key do you want? That's the derived key length in bytes. And what algorithm do you want us to use? That would be, if you call the constructor, that would be the hash algorithm name, and the static one-shots also take it. So those are all of the parameters that are inputs, and the output will just be a binary blob, which is your derived key. And then you can use that and pass it into whatever crypto algorithm your heart desires.
That makes sense. Assume that the constructor copies the key, right?
Correct. The constructor takes ownership of the key, so it will make its own copy.
And then what does dispose do? Free some native memory stuff behind it?
Yeah, the implementation would be that we create a handle under the covers, either into CNG or OpenSSL, whatever we use under the covers, and dispose would free the handle.
And then the benefit over the static ones is if you only ever derive one key, then the static ones is fine. If you keep creating new keys, then creating an instance and calling derive key on that is probably faster or more resource friendly or whatever.
Correct. You're absolutely right. It is more resource friendly. And in fact, ASP.NET would get benefit out of the instance methods because they hold on to these for long periods of time. Creating these is not free. Creating these itself could involve a derivation operation. So if you're going to reuse the same key over and over, it is to your advantage to just create it once and then keep calling derive key the instance method over and over again.
That makes sense.
The APIs that fill a span as the destination don't take how many bytes do you want me to populate, because they just assume you're populating the entire destination buffer. It's similar to we have APIs that we added to get random or to random number generator, where if you pass a destination, the idea is you wanted them to fill the entire thing. If you wanted the API to fill only part of the destination, slice it before passing it in.
Interesting. So that's a different pattern, right? Normally we expect, I was wondering whether it should return the number of bytes written, but you're basically saying we write into the entire destination.
Correct, because with most cryptographic algorithms, most algorithms have a fixed number of bytes that they operate on. SHA-256, for instance, will always write a 256-bit digest. Like, that's just how it works. SP800-108, by construction, is defined or is intended to write an arbitrary length derived key. So we interpret the size of the destination buffer as the number of bytes you wanted us to fill.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, we do the same thing in AS, GCM, and CCM for the tag size.
Yeah.
If we're writing to the span, you've told it, like, we could take destination, comma, destination length, but that, like, span has a length, so we just take it. Like, it's the tuple of the pointer and the length, and you've already specified the length.
Yeah, there's nothing wrong with it, I guess. I just found it surprising. But
Yeah.
I'm not a crypto guy, so...
I mean, we could also return the int, which is destination.length, but in this case, I don't think it has meaning, because it's the thing that you would be slicing is destination, and you already sliced it.
Right.
Yeah, I guess what throws me was the method name, right? If the method name would be something like, fill or,
Well, I mean, I think this is one of those, like, especially considering our history, it's, name the array returning one and now spanify it. And it's like, well, now you get this derived key that writes to a span and is void.
Yeah, Yeah, there's nothing wrong with it. I mean, I think the array one would have the same problem for me, where you. But ironically, we don't have that, right? I mean, you could have an array-based one that takes the array, and you just fill it, right? But for some reason, you decided that we give you a new array.
Oh, if you want it filled, learn what a span is.
Yeah, I guess.
Or just call the non-span APIs, because the non-span APIs take how many bytes do you want?
Yeah. Well, but that's if you want your particular array to get that you already have to get used, then
sure.
Right. So what I recall from this proposal is the thing that we didn't know is how to distribute it, because I think you wanted this to go net standard 2.0 because Crypto Board wants people who are still stuck on full framework to be able to use it.
Right.
Yeah, which means we need a package to put it in, and right now, as one type, it doesn't feel like a package, and so I don't think we came up with a good general name for any other requests of this size that we get.
Yeah, that's something we keep running into. I mean, the problem really is predicting the future, right? Like, if you basically create the one dumping ground package, then, well, you know, how high of a layer can this access? Can this access anything? Because you can always type forward down, right? But then this would then transitively depend on potentially a large number of modules that ship in the box at some point, right?
Potentially, yes.
But I don't have any major objections to. I mean, yeah. I mean, I'm also fine with saying there's another one-off package, right? Because I mean, the only problem with packages is number of files. But I'm fine with telling people, like, yeah, if you want to have something out of band, you pay for this in terms of getting a file on disk. Don't like it, link it.
The only other thing that is an interesting comment here is the label and context parameters, the byte array and string parameters. They are optional, but I'm not making them nullable. And the reason is that the spec very strongly says, like, you really should pass data here, even though the algorithm doesn't strictly require it. So if nothing else, I'm forcing people to pass string.empty or a 0-length array for label and context. Basically to force the caller to say, I intended to pass you empty data.
That works.
And we're otherwise not doing parameter validation on that. If you pass us bad labels and context, that's on you as a caller.
Yeah.
I don't know. The spec just says it's some bytes that get hashed, so I don't know there's such thing as a bad label.
It can't contain embedded nulls.
Fair enough.
If it contains embedded nulls, you get ambiguous behaviors. So we would document, please don't pass us embedded nulls, but we're not going to check it for you, because that's something you should have done ahead of time before calling us.
Yeah, I mean, these are not APIs that are, you know, things that I expect people to just call it, right? So they would have to do some reading on their own anyway.
Because label, if I remember the KDF correctly, label should basically be a, you know, quote a word, quote U8. Like that's, label is why are you calling this thing. Context might be more complicated and you're supposed to mix some of your state and someone else's state, but I might be thinking of ECIES instead of this one.
If you look at the section that says terminology in this description, it links to ASP.NET's diagram for how label and context are used, and I think that gives a very good overview of how we expect people to use this. For example, label might be label might be the literal string encrypted message, and context might be the username of the user who's to receive that message. Stuff like that.
Right. Well, my point was for label, it shouldn't be a computed value; it should be a fixed value. And
right.
So that one, why would you have put an embedded null in it? But context, once some stuff got glued together, then maybe you screwed up.
But I think embedded nulls in context are okay. I think label's the one that can't have it.
Fair enough. And yeah, that one is
easy.
If you're not passing a constant string there, something's gone horribly wrong. Yeah.
Oh, there are Bitcoin people here in our chat right now.
Yep.
Awesome.
Bye-bye.
What is that? Right click?
It's just left click on this little chevron-y thingy here, and then you can say block user on YouTube.
Excellent.
I don't think I've ever noticed this chevron when I was hosting the stream.
Yeah, it's, I think right after the username. It just here is a new line because the username is unreasonably long.
I get it. All right.
So that's that.
So then I guess this looks good as proposed. I don't know what else to say.
So the package name that you're proposing, Levi, is the same as the type name?
I would probably
Possibly.
just make it SP800 108 probably, because if there's other things.
I guess that's true.
This,
If we add the other 6 KDFs from SP800 108, we can put them in the same package.
Yes. I mean, I don't think we ever will, but at least we'll leave the option open to do that.
Yeah.
And we do have consumers, even like ASP.NET today uses this algorithm. So yeah, it would be nice if we could maybe get that out of ASP.NET's repo and into ours.
All right, so that's System Security Cryptography SP800, or I mean, we know that it's 800 108, but it's SP 800,108, and I mean, we could put an underscore in the package name if we hate it ourselves.
What?
But,
oh, you mean between the numbers?
Yeah.
There's supposed to be a dash between 800 and 108.
I see. Yeah, I don't care. And I virtually guarantee you people that call this API don't care either.
Yeah. You know, if we put an M dash, I think that's legal.
Yeah. Do you want to get security issues in NuGet? Because that's how you get security issues in NuGet.
Hey, if NuGet allows spoofing, like that's...
Yeah, but our style rules say you can't check in Unicode literal, so you'd have to write it as SP800 / U whatever. So.
All right.
Cool.
Yep.
Is Jeremy
Do you have
back?
anything else?
Or
Easy.
I don't know.
Thank you.
We have this one
There
here
you-
that keeps popping up, but I think that's a different problem.
Ooh, initial capacity for ASN writer. Middle of your screen. Up one.
See, this is what happens when Jeremy's the only one with his camera on. He gets to say, like, I want all of these issues to be prioritized.
I mean, all of you get to say that. If you have something, now's your time to shine.
All right. So, in the type writer, right now we only take the rule set to use when writing, and the first time that you call write, we request a number of bytes. I don't remember if I think it's a multiple of kilobytes. So whatever the next level of kilobytes would be that would cover your request. But a lot of the places that we use the writer, we never write more than like 10 bytes. We just need them to be written canonically. And so for both, don't make as much, or I know I'm going to write a whole bunch of stuff, please go ahead and grow yourself. The initial capacity hint is being proposed to add to the constructor.
So what is this unit here? Like bytes or elements or?
Bytes.
I see. Because normally you use capacity in the context of collections where it's number of elements.
Call it initial buffer size.
Yeah, I think that would make it clear. Even initial, I guess, buffer size is better than size.
We use the term capacity in other similar APIs, right?
I've never seen initial capacity outside of collections, but maybe
What's
just
String Builder call it?
True. Okay. String Builder, I think, calls it capacity.
But I think String Builder also has a property called capacity that you can set. Yeah, String Builder calls it capacity.
Yeah, I guess capacity for String Builder is kind of number of elements if you think of it as a collection of jars, but yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, like, the problem with as in writer is that it's kind of like a collection of like things, right? But they're not. I wouldn't think of it as bytes, quite frankly.
Well, it is a writer. That's the thing. Like if it were just like an ASN collection or something, then I could imagine that the initial capacity might be how many ASNs do you have inside of it,
I guess.
whatever that means. But a writer like is turning it into a binary representation.
I can get
Yeah, I
behind
mean the type never shares out its buffer. The closest that it gets is you can.
So how do you get?
You can ask get encoded length. Well, you can either call encode, which returns the byte array, or you can call try encode and give it a span. And you can. It has an instance method get encoded length that will tell you if you call try encode right now, how many bytes would it write.
Right.
But so nowhere do we say buffer or capacity or any of that in the surface currently. So we don't have a good naming pattern to fall on.
I mean,
but initial buffer size seems good to me.
Yeah, initial buffer size, even initial capacity, I can live with that as well. But I guess initial buffer size is a bit more explicit. All right. You got your first API for .NET 8. Congratulations. I
think Kevin's not at work today, so there might be a PR in like an hour.
And then we would just hold it for a few weeks.
No, tiny things contributed by the community is allowed to go in early.
Nice.
What about this one, Levi? You ready to talk to this one?
Wow, we haven't talked to this one yet.
Because it's marked for future.
Wow. Okay. Yeah. If so, you can compare two strings for equality. You can compare two strings for inequality. If you do a search and replace in your code of string with read-only span of char, your equality and inequality checks will now be reference equality, not content equality, which is almost certainly not what you intended. So this says, hey, as an analyzer, if we see that you have a read-only span of char, or a span of char, and you're comparing it for equality against another read-only span of char, string, whatever, we would flag it and say, did you mean to use sequence equals instead? Because that's how you do content equality. That said, now that we have U8 literals, we might want to do the same thing for byte.
So you would warn only on read-only span of char or read-only span of any T?
Read-only span of char is the one that I see people getting confused by just because they expect it to have the same semantics as string. I mean, if you call read-only span of int, for instance, and then compare it for equality against something, that's really no different than comparing, say, two int arrays against each other. And I just don't really see people having done that in the past. So it's not something I just see people do going forward. Like it's the wrong thing. It's just I don't see people falling into the trap.
Yeah.
My expectation is that most people aren't using operator equals with spans, and if they are, they might be doing the wrong thing.
Right. I've not seen any greenfield code do this. The only code I've ever seen do this is where they started off with string and then they later spanified it.
Right. And so I think it would be safe to say maybe we could have one for char and one for char and byte, since those are the known string ones, and maybe a separate ID for all other T, just for people to be able to disable one but not the other. But I think we really want it to be for any T.
Yeah,
and that's fair
on this one. I think it really depends on, I guess, what your origin is, right? Because if you started with regular arrays, then it makes sense, right? Because you're basically comparing, are these the same, identities that basically point into the same memory. Versus if you started with a string, then, well, you probably really meant content equality, right? So to me, gating it on the T kind of makes sense.
Well, even then, when you're working with arrays, reference equality somewhat makes sense, because no two arrays can refer to the same data. However, when you're working with spans, you start getting into the concepts of they can refer to different ranges of the same data. They can represent the same data. You start getting into, well, now I've got stack allocated data more often, and actually trying to compare the refs is probably the wrong thing 9 times out of 10.
Well, so I mean, I can say of places that I know that I've written code that does use the equality operators, and we would either have to warn them or figure out how to detect that it's the valid case. One is I have a few places that I need, unfortunately, to distinguish the empty span and the null span. And the only way to check that is equal default. And so, I mean, we could certainly say equal default is specifically exempted from the thing because there's nothing else you could have wanted it to do there. Unless they thought it was going to be a check for the empty string. But the other one is in some tests of showing that it is in fact that 2 read-only memories that are being produced are the same read-only memory, and that is that their spans are equal, is a thing I just wrote into a test. And so maybe that's yes, this is one of the very rare cases where you actually did mean to do, am I the exact same pointer and length, and that it suppresses the warning, but it's not nonsense, it's just not string equality. And this goes with, once again, I really hate that we used byte instead of making a char 8.
Right. Well, that wouldn't make the problem go away for char, though. And I think you hit at something really salient, though, which is like we can never know with 100% accuracy whether your code is correctly written, right? It's more of this is really suspicious, and
right.
You should double check it to make sure this is really what you meant.
Right, and if people actually wanting to use the equality operators is rare, then just painting the suppression around each usage is not the end of the world. But it's weird because like we wrote an op equality on span because we said it makes sense, and then now we're saying we've seen that people are calling it when they think it means something else, or in particular they just changed the signature of a method from string to read only span, and now the code is doing something different.
Mm-hmm.
And that gets weird. So I'm assuming that we would want it on by default, and so now it's sort of are we saying we were wrong when we added span equality?
Well, I don't think we were wrong, because you kind of like it always exists. You just choose what behavior you're getting, right? I think that,
I guess it's true. Equals is defined by the language to always be valid.
So we could have, of course, made it like warn or not compile with obsolete or something, right? But I think that seemed too far, I guess, and the time we did it.
I think the issue is that it likely would have been better for us to have sequence equal and reference equal.
Agree.
And we should have never exposed the operators, and then we likely should have decided what to do with dot equals the object method.
I'm pretty sure that's a compiler failure right now.
Yeah, I think we actually obsoleted that one. And so I think if we had decided don't expose the operators, instead tell people to use sequence or reference equals explicitly, it would have solved the issue.
I mean, I'm fine with just saying like we go down that path and say basically add a reference equal method, and then the fixes, if you think your code is correct, instead of suppressing it, you just call the reference equals method, right? This way you basically get to a point where you're green and you express your semantics in code. I think that would be a reasonable way of dealing with it.
Yeah. Well, the potential downside to exposing a reference equals is that there is the existing static reference equals, which takes the object. So this would new slot that. And while it would have the desired behavior, since it's a ref struct, it may also be confusing to some users.
Depends on how you do it, right? You could just, I mean, given that sequence equal is an instance method, I think it's reasonable to say we have a reference equal.
Sequence equal is an extension method, but
Sure.
I
because-
assume reference equal would also be an extension method because Jan doesn't like it when we put members on span.
Yeah, I think the problem with sequence equal is you want a different behavior, right?
Sequence equal as is fine, and we also I don't think we specialize types in sequence equal. It's just we don't like
Correct.
span has a very small type footprint, and then it has a lot of things you can glom onto that grow it.
Right.
Yeah.
And the memory extensions, but
Well, so sequence equal does have a specialized footprint for bitwise equatable things.
Right, but it's
fair enough.
behaviorally identical to iterate element by element and then call t dot equals.
Right.
So if we did reference equals in as extension method, then it would be that would be where the concern would come in, because it would be a 2-parameter reference equal.
But it's fine, right? Because reference equal takes objects, right? So this one would just be a different type, right?
Right. So
it's a
so
regular
you
overload.
do, rather than span of t dot reference equal span 1 span 2, you do span 1 dot reference equal span 2.
Yeah, and at the
That should
if
work.
you did it with extension invocation, it would not be at all ambiguous and weird. And with static invocation, one of them lives on object and the other one would live on like memory extensions. So that also wouldn't be weird. So yeah, I think it'd be fine.
Right.
Right.
But once Tanner said new slot, I had to think of the. I apparently decided I needed to think out loud.
So given that this is for 8, I think it's reasonable for us to say, let's try to just blatantly tell people like, don't use equality operators on spans, period, no matter what the t is. And if you really intended to have reference equality, then call dot reference equals. And I think
Well,
that would be...
the analyzer would presumably work across all platforms, not just .NET 8. And this API that we're proposing would only be .NET 8, correct?
I mean, yes, but you can obviously write the analyzer to say only flag it when you have a reference equal API to begin with.
I mean,
No, like we want people to know, regardless of what framework they're targeting, you've done something suspicious.
I mean, yes, but I mean, all I'm saying is that you get to control this analyzer, right? So like you could decide to make it .NET 8 only, you could decide to have one everywhere, you could design to give different diagnostics based on whether you have reference equals or not.
you could also check in reference equals this week and save a year on how long the analyzer has to sit waiting on the API to be callable.
Right.
I mean, if we want to approve reference equals right now, like we can do it, and like everyone said, it's a really easy check-in.
Yeah, I mean, yeah,
In
sure.
particular, the implementation is just invoke the existing equality operator.
Yeah, and then we'll just put a pragma suppressor around it at some point.
I mean, it doesn't really solve the problem that Levi has, though, because, I mean, reference equal then is in .NET 7, sure, but you probably still want this to be on .NET standard.
Yeah, so
2x,
the
right?
analyzer
So
could
it's-
warn on all systems, and then the fixer could fire if your TFM is .NET 7 or higher.
Right.
No, I
Instead of
specifically don't want a fixer here. That's the thing.
No, fair enough. But the analyzer, I guess the warning description could say, if you did mean reference equality, call reference equal if it's available on your platform, or suppress this warning.
So why don't you want to have a fixer? Because you would basically show 2 fixers. You would show the one for reference equal, and you would show the sum to sequence equal, and the user has to decide which one they want. Right?
Yes.
How does that work?
They both show up. Like if you do control dot, they basically show up as alternate in the UI. The user has to pick the one.
Yeah, and if you're concerned of somebody hitting fix all, I think there's a thing you can do to say fix all is not allowed.
Okay, yeah,
Yeah.
that's the thing. Like it's one of those things where, hey user, you meant to do one of these 2 things, but I don't know what you intended. You have to analyze your code within its context and figure out which of these 2 is correct.
Right.
And it's probably always A.
I will say, analyzers or fixers that disable fix all are the most annoying thing ever.
I would agree with that.
Because either I know I'm going to do this one by one and I'm going to go through and do it one by one, or I know I want to fix it everywhere.
Right.
Audit the results and then uncheck the few that I don't want, and not having that option is just a major pain.
Yeah, keep in
Right,
mind
because
fix
that's
all
the
also
issue
has
here.
multiple scopes. So you can say fix all in current file, you can say fix all in project, or fix all in solution. And very often I know that in this particular library or this particular file, the only thing I'm doing is this, and then I usually have tests anyway. So like I always hated when the tool says no, I want you to really do it manually the hard way, like in the 1980s. It's like, what's the value by doing that manually? But I mean, I feel like I think the bigger question is, are we okay with a UI that basically proposes two alternates? And I would say that's the Roslyn API concept or UX concept, right? The light bulb shows you multiple options, and many of them are mutually exclusive, right? You pick one or the other. And I think based on the naming, I think it's obvious to the user that what one would do, right? So I think it's fine.
And I assume it always adds suppress this warning.
You always have the way to suppress in source, no matter what. Like even if you don't have fixers, that always shows up. I think as a user though, I generally dislike warnings that I have to suppress. That's why I like the idea of having an API.
Right. But this would be so if you get the two fixers, one which says use sequence equal,
right?
And then the one for reference equal should only register itself if reference equal exists in the targeting set. So if you're talking about net standard 2 or something, you would get the light bulb and it would say suppress warning whatever or replace with sequence equal. And if you're on net whatever or higher, then it would say suppress warning, replace with sequence equal, or replace with reference equal.
Yeah, I guess what I would do if I were to target net standard 2.0, I would probably define my own sequence equal, my own reference equal, suppress it inside the method body, and then just change my call sites to call this one instead, so I don't have to do the suppressions all over the place. So I think it's fine.
There is some precedence against all of this. There is an analyzer right now that checks various calls to string APIs like string.contain, string.indexOf, whatever, and says, okay, you're not passing in a string comparison. And the API that you're calling by default is culture aware instead of invariant, or instead of ordinal. That analyzer very specifically did not ship with a fixer. And the reason we did that is that we didn't want to have a fixer that encouraged you to change the behavior of your code because we simply don't know what the correct behavior was.
I also find that behavior in analyzers very annoying.
Right.
Yeah, I agree.
But that's the problem, though, right? Like it's one of those things where we look at the call site and we say, like, this call site is suspicious because it's suspicious exactly because we don't know what you intended, and because we don't know what you intended, we don't know which of these two fixers applies to you.
I think this is the general disconnect between us and I think the Roslyn team, or the way I use Roslyn, or the way I've used ReSharper for years, is that I don't think that fixers can only exist when they're correct. I think fixers are meant to show the user, here is things you can do to your code, right? A lot of them will change behavior, right? So the difference really is...
We don't ship fixers that change behavior, as far as I'm aware.
Well, we ship tons of fixers that potentially change behavior in subtle ways, and we explicitly tell users, and Roslyn has closed multiple bugs as fixers are not guaranteed to generate correct code that compiles.
Right.
They are generating a fix, and you might need to do additional fix-ups afterwards to make your code more correct. And that is one reason why people love ReSharper, because they provide all of these nice things for users out of the box, and most of the times they work. And when they don't, it's generally trivial to go and fix it up to make it correct after.
Yeah, you talk about things, Hannah, though, that you find super annoying. For me, the worst thing with a fixer is one that generates bad code.
See, but
right, and we should aim for generating correct code where we can.
Right.
But if we're talking about 1% correct, 99% wrong, that's bad. But if we're talking about like 95% correct, 5% wrong, then I think it's better to have the fixer than not.
Yeah, it's like the string example, right? So like arguably you change behavior of your code, right? But like my existing code might be wrong, right? So like
your existing code's almost certainly wrong. That's why the analyzer exists.
Exactly. So but now let's say for my library, I decide all my string comparisons are ordinal, right? As a starting point, right? Like making me type it manually in all my files is not going to make it better for me. If I have a fix all that says, yeah, whatever you see right now, use ordinal, and then let's see what we do from there, is probably, like, I think this is what I also mean by, like, there's a difference in what kind of code you're writing, right? If you write super low level, systems level code, where you're super conservative about behavior changes, yeah, you may use Roslyn differently from how the vast majority of our user uses it, which is basically high level app code where, well, if it's wrong, I will find it out later, right? But I think there's as Tanner said, the reason people like ReSharper is because it gets you halfway there without making you type the code like it's the 1980s, right? That's really where I think the discrepancy is between what we shoot for and how users tend to use the product.
I feel, for me, I mean, at least I fall into the camp emo of the. I'm focused on code bases that need to be fairly reliable. I don't think that's
Right.
a low level versus high level thing. I think that's how much do you care? How much money is riding on your business? If you're a financial firm and you roll out you have a million line code base and you run an analyzer and it gets a decimal point wrong in some place, like you might find out after you lose $200 million.
Right.
I think that's a case where any code base in that scenario should have the relevant tests and pre-production validation to ensure that doesn't happen.
Yeah, it's not
and
just-
if they aren't, it's not a.
Tanner, we have 8 million tests and we check in bugs every day.
Yeah.
Right, and that's always possible, but that's the point, is regardless of whether the fixer does something or not, it's the responsibility of the code reviewer and the test to try and catch things.
Yeah.
It is,
Things
but
are
there-
going to get missed.
But if you're using a fixture to roll out 1,000 fixes across a code base, it's an incredibly valuable property to be able to differentiate. I'm guaranteeing that if the fixer applies, it is not going to introduce bugs, versus this fixer may introduce bugs, and I'm okay with that. And I'm okay with both categories, but it's imperative that I know which category it is, because for certain operations, I am never going to apply the latter. It's super annoying when I roll out a fixer and then I have to check every single one of those 1,000 cases by hand. Whereas I would much rather, if out of those 1,000 cases, I could have auto-fixed the 100 that the auto-fixer knew were guaranteed to be 100% correct, and just not bothered with the other 900 right now.
I don't think there's a fixer in existence that guarantees that it will do the correct thing 100% of the time.
There absolutely are.
We do that.
Even something as simple as adding parentheses may be fixing a bug that users were unintentionally relying on because it changes the order of operations, even when their parentheses should have otherwise been assumed safe.
No,
It may
a
be-
fix that added parentheses that was guaranteed to be 100% correct would only add them when it was a stylistic thing and wasn't changing order of operations, order of precedence.
Right, but it might be preserving a bug that was there already that may be more visible by the addition of the parentheses.
No. There are situations where I can add parentheses where it does not change precedence. A fixer knows when parentheses will change precedence or not.
Yeah, it should.
If I have
definitely.
a fixer that's only adding them, where the goal is to stylistically add them only in cases where it will not change behavior, a fixer can do that.
So you're saying we should only have stylistic fixers?
There are cases where we've obsoleted APIs and we've said, hey, here's a complementary fixer which reroutes your call site to the new API in a compatible fashion. I believe we've introduced this before.
Yeah, there is a huge difference between I want you to make a change, and I know that behavior change is a change that I want. I want you to pass whatever the flag is. I want you to be explicit. Like I want you to take whatever the default is for that method. I want you to be explicit about passing that in, right? That's something that a fixer can do automatically. We have fixers that say, hey, I see you're calling string builder.append with a string, right? And it's a single character string. You should be calling the character version of that. Those are 100% identical, right?
Mm-hmm.
That is a perfectly valid fix to apply.
Those are all stylistic, though, not behavior.
That's not stylistic. That's performance.
No, that is for the purposes of the code a stylistic change.
No, it is a performance improvement. What are you talking about?
The original method should defer to the latter one, and so any sufficiently optimized JIT or AOT compiler should be able to go ahead and do that for you behind the scenes.
Well,
so
ours
it is
does not.
Sure, but so realistically, it is a stylistic change. It is not
No,
a
that is not the
behavioral
case.
change.
It might be a stylistic change in 10 years. Today, it is not a stylistic change.
So let's cut this short because otherwise we're arguing for like 20 more minutes. But I think the question is like, do we first agree that there's a warning here that we should raise? Or do we believe that there are cases where the intentional behavior was, I want a reference equal, I get a reference equal, my code is fine? Do we believe that most people that have reference equals today do it accidentally? Or do we believe that there's legitimate reasons why people do that? And so I think the first question for me is like, what do we do about the warning? And then the second thing is, based on that, like, do we offer a fix or do we not?
My observations have been that when people do it against span of char, it's almost always a mistake because they were rewriting existing code and didn't realize that the behavior had changed. Tanner had brought up the point about just arbitrary T's. I don't have many observations to go on there, so I don't think I can make a good statement about that. Tanner would know more.
Yeah, my view on the arbitrary T is that if someone's comparing them using reference equality, they are likely doing or considering the wrong thing because so many languages treat the equality differently. And it would be better and would have been better from day one if we explicitly just had reference versus sequence equal. That way it is clear in code which one you're doing.
So it sounds almost like you're making an argument not from a like I'm porting code, but I'm used to this other language and I've now hit a cliff where I'm having lack of success with the framework.
Right. There's a case where equals is basically ambiguous on what it could mean for span, and you have to learn it. And so just reading code with equals, it's not clear what it's doing or what the intended behavior was.
Okay.
Yeah, and I'll agree with that of when where I said I added it in test of asserting that two operations were returning literally identical read-only memories, or rather that the two spans produced by the read-only memories were literally the same span. I had even forgotten that equals did the right thing here, and I had to go look at what the implementation did. And was like, oh yeah, this is better than me calling overlaps and looking for offset 0 and that they had the same length, because it's just doing as ref,
right,
or are same on the refs, and is the length the same. But if I could just have called that dot reference equals, then now the code is more descriptive of what it's doing. So I think we should totally add reference equals or reference equal or whatever we think the right S is. And I think getting it in earlier is better than later. And then that a warning is probably good and a fixer is probably good. And
so let's talk about the warning. So do you think we should special case the T? Because I'd rather say we warn on any T because it's easier to explain to people. Like I dislike this nuance of saying, oh, for read-only span of char, we really don't want you to use double equals. But if it's read-only span of byte or any other T, we don't care. That seems harder to explain.
My only reason for saying we would special case is if we wanted to say that for char and or byte it was on by default and for other types it was not. If we're willing to just say we think this code is ambiguous and the words here are going to help a lot, and we just want to leave it on by default, then I don't think we need a special case.
Yeah. And the only reason I special case char is because that's where I see the majority of problems are today. I wasn't considering the argument that Tanner made about, a cliff of failure, basically.
Well, it's also to me the mismatch of like, it really depends on where your span is coming from, right? But like if your spans are coming from strings, then using chars, or then you rewrote your code from string to, let's say, UTF-8 chars, right, which basically means bytes. Like because of this mismatch, and then you're in a generic context where it might be bytes or chars, it's reasonable to say because you often don't know or don't remember, they just have one consistent way of doing things, and then you're much less likely to byte yourself. That's also why I kind of like the idea that, well, if it's messed up for part of your scenarios and you frequently go between them, it makes sense to just say there's one convention that always does the right thing.
Right, and what Jeremy said was what I was thinking was, we could specialize character and byte because they are known cases of this doesn't behave like string does, and it's a known case of users are hitting this hole already. And the other types are maybe we did this API wrong, and if we did it from day one, we'd do it differently. And so that becomes a case of, for all other T, do we want it on by default and effectively soft deprecate operator equals, or do we want it off by default and allow users who want reliability or whatever tag it goes under to be able to opt into seeing I might be doing something confusing here?
I think I'm more in the category of, like, to me, analyzers are a way also to instruct people and teach them. So I'd be more in favor of saying, let's deprecate the operators on spans, in favor of an explicit sequence equal reference equal call, and just say it's for any t, just don't do it. The only value that I see in, let's say, doing it for different t's would be to dial in severities or defaultness, but in this case I would just say let's make the default be 1 on all t's. Let's do it early in 8. Let's see how it goes, right? Let's see how many people actually complain. And
would that
sorry?
Levi?
I think Levi started the sentence and then
Maybe his headset disconnected.
yeah, maybe.
Yeah, my personal opinion is we should take the fact that we haven't hit super absolute frozen act of God or JOC, which is the same thing, approval, and we should really just get reference equal in now. And then the analyzer, maybe we add an 8. And obsoleting the equal, we can decide to do in 8. But I think adding the reference equal method so that there's already a thing people can start moving to is goodness.
Yeah, that one I mean, I think adding this method I think is generally goodness no matter what we do.
Right.
I was more thinking for the analyzer, it makes sense to do it early in 8 and just see how many people complain, and then I would start with a more draconian approach until proven that this doesn't work for us.
Right. Yeah, with the analyzer piece, doing that in the 8 wave and starting it with all T's warned by default and see if we get enough people who are like, this is stupid, then that could give us a reason to split it. But the reference equal method, again, I think I said in a comment before, we don't really talk about version numbers here. We talk about is the API shape right or not. But I think that we should push to get reference equal in at 7.
Sorry, I missed the earlier answer. My laptop overheated and shut down. Yeah, outside is fun today. So, sorry, analyzer or obsolete?
Get it in for 7. Get the reference equals API in for 7, and then get the analyzer in early for 8. That way we can start getting feedback as soon as possible.
And I think in this case it would be analyzer, even if we do obsolete the operators, because the analyzer has value running on older TFMs. Even if it just makes you add your own reference equal method to call.
Exactly.
But since we can't obsolete back in time, I think we would be looking at an analyzer, which could turn itself off if it's targeting netdata forward, because if we give it the same diagnostic code in the obsolation, then we can save on the cycles that it spent analyzing code.
Okay, so we've approved a reference equals API here then, even though one was never proposed.
Yeah.
This is how we roll.
Sounds good.
Does it matter if there's only 4 of us in the room, or 5 of us?
I mean, seems reasonable to me, no?
You're a partner. You're allowed to just approve things willy-nilly, right?
I mean, normally with our process, we post an issue, community people can comment. We just invented a method in the last 10 minutes and approved it.
Well, we're logically overloading object.reference equal. It's been approved for 20 years. 22 years.
I'll throw up a proposal and we can talk about it on Thursday. And on Thursday we can say we talked about it on Tuesday.
Fair enough. You get to pick, but yeah. I think we should match the plurality of whatever the static one on object is. I don't remember if it's equals or equal. But
an interesting thing to note is that with the introduction of ref fields and ref structs existing in general, that maybe this is somewhat of a pattern we're establishing for how do you expose reference equality for reference structs with ref fields. And it would be expose an extension method called reference equals, and then for value equality, one called sequence or value equals. Just noting that there's other libraries that expose their own like span 2D types and things like that. So
Maybe, but then at that
this might
point
be
we talk
somewhat of
about
a
the
pattern.
language having. Yeah, but at that point we
Yeah.
talk about like the language exposing operator equals equals or operator equals equals equals, stuff like that. Right, and then this would serve as the implementation behind that language construct.
No, thank you.
But I mean that's really
Yeah,
where
yeah.
that's really where this comes down to, though, right?
Yeah.
Okay, cool. I'll get that issue up and see what we can do. Thank you.
So what would be the severity be? Warning, right?
Warning correctness, I guess.
And then your category is correctness. Do we have?
Yeah.
Does it exist? I think every time we look, correctness is not actually a category. I think it's reliability exists or performance. I don't think correctness is a thing.
I can maybe look at some precedent and suggest a category
Yeah.
once I'm back on the laptop.
I do feel that it is reliability and not correctness.
Yeah.
Sure.
I'm pretty sure. All
I
right.
think one of these days I would get around to bookmarking the list of categories, but I don't, and then it takes like 20 minutes to find it because they're all super generic words.
Yeah. I do highly recommend going out into the sauna today, by the way, if you feel so inclined.
By sauna, you mean the air for free in the Puget Sound region?
Yeah, yes, that.
I might be dumb enough to walk to lunch today.
All right, friends. So we're done for today. So Thursday we do our topic that we discussed with the WCF folks about the data contextualization and the exposure of the APIs. So I think this one will be Tuesday. We don't do anything, I think, other than the WCF stuff on Thursday. Will be my guess.
Oh,
Because it's
so we have a
sizable.
serialization thing on Thursday?
Well, it's basically they want to make WCF better, but WCF had it for some WS for some Whistle stuff. They have some code generation stuff that they would like to support, but the existing stuff depends on code DOM, and so we had some discussion about adding code DOM to the product. Now they just rather have some more public APIs so the tools can make sense of the Whistle, I think is the current plan.
Sounds good.
Alrighty, then have fun, everyone. Don't die in the sun.
Thanks.
Bye, everyone.